Okay, everyone, we are going to continue on with part two to part one. If you haven't watched part one, consider clicking on the link in the description below because you will not understand anything if you do not watch part one first. In part one, we went over an analysis, we conducted an analysis, we evaluated the question, and we annotated the diagram. And so you cannot continue on with a Euclidean question, a Euclidean shape, if you haven't annotated it, if you haven't done a structural analysis on it. No. So what you want to do is click off the video, click on the link in the description below, watch it first. If you've already watched part one, without further ado, let's get started. Now, 11.1, complete the following. D3 equals 2 ellipses plus ellipses exterior angle of a cyclic quad. And so what they've done is they've given us a hint. They've hinted that we have to prove that D3 equals to the sum of two other angles. Okay, now they've specifically said that we have to prove this using the principle of exterior angle of a triangle. The very first thing you want to do is you want to identify the position that D3 is in. D3 is in this position. The next thing that you want to do is you want to identify the triangles that are close to D3. So that's what we're going to do. Now, which triangles are close to D3? We have D, D, E, K, and we have DEH. Okay, so now remember when we are working with the theorem of exterior angle of a triangle, what we need to do is we first have to make sure that the angle is in the exterior position. It is at the exterior of that triangle. Now, the angle that is at the exterior of the triangle will equal to the sum of the opposite interior angles. So you need to identify the opposite interior angles from the external angle. Let's look at D3. What are the opposite interior angles from D3 when we're specifically focusing on DEK? Now, we can clearly see that would be E1 and K1. Now, but the question is, should we use E1 and K1 or should we instead use E1 and H1? Now, why am I referring to E1 and H1? Well, that's because D3 is also the exterior to triangle DEH. And so D3 can also equal to E1 plus H1. It can also equal to E1 and K4. Now, we have to be very careful. We need to approach each and every single Euclidean question with intention. We need to approach each and every single Euclidean question with diligence. Why do I say that? Well, that's because Euclidean geometry it's not a very straightforward topic. There are a lot of nuance. It's a very nuanced topic. And so there isn't a one set method that you always have to use, but there are different practices that make you conceptualize the question, the diagram a lot easier. Now, it is no coincidence that we have a lot more annotations in the green triangle. In triangle DEH, we know that H1 equals to E1, and we know that DH equals to DE. When we compare the green triangle to the green triangle has a lot more annotations compared to the yellow triangle. Now, with the yellow triangle, we know that E1 doesn't really equal to any other angle in the yellow triangle. And so what we want to do is we want to focus on using the triangle with the most information and the most annotations. So, what does that mean? Well, that means we will focus on the green triangle. Okay, so I just want to highlight that green triangle. Okay, and that's triangle DAG. So that means D3 will equal to E1 plus H1. I just want to write that down. D3 equals to H1 plus E1 because of exterior angle of a triangle. Let's continue on. 11.2, prove that DEFH is a cyclic quad. Now, there are certain methods and principles that we need to utilize and employ into our conceptualization of this question. The we need to understand the process and the method that we will apply to this question, which will result in us proving that this shape is indeed a cyclic quad. The very first thing that you would like to do, the very first step of the process, is you want to list all the cyclic quad theorems. Okay, so we have angles in the same segment. What we also have is exterior angle of a cyclic quad. And then the last one would be opposite angles of a cyclic quad are equal to 180 degrees. let's first start off with angles in the same segment. Okay, now a lot of students make this mistake. They think that in order to prove that a shape is a cyclic quad, in this case A, B, C, D, they assume that angle A equals to B because of angles in the same segment. That makes absolutely no sense at all. Okay, we cannot approach this question in an irrational manner. Okay, or with any confusion. No, it's not possible to say that A equals to B because of angles in the same segment when we don't even know that ABCD is a cyclic quad. You cannot use cyclic quad theorems if we're trying to prove it's a cyclic quad. That is a complete mistake. And so I don't want to hear of any student make the mistake thinking that A equals to B in this case because of angles in the same segment when we're trying to prove that it's a cyclic quad. So what we want to do instead is we want to prove that A equals to B. So you just want to write a goal for yourself. The goal is to prove that A equals to B. How do we do that? You can do that by proving that both A and B have an angle in common. You can prove that A equals to Z, for instance. You could also prove that B equals to Z as well, using a different set of principles and ideas without any cyclic quad theorems or ideas, okay? And so once we've done that, we've proved that A equals to Z, B equals to Z. That means A and B will equal to each other as a result of that, okay? Because they're both equal to Z. And so, as a result of you proving that A and B equals to each other, that will validate the fact that ABCD is a cyclic quad. That will prove that ABCD is indeed a cyclic quad because angles in the same segment so happen to have the exact same angle, that they're equal to. Now let's look at exterior angle of a cyclic quad. What you first want to do is you want to identify the angle that is at the exterior of the cyclic quad, which is that angle over there. So we have A, B, C, D. I'm going to label this part as D1 and D2. So D2 is the exterior angle to the cyclic quad ABCD. A is the opposite interior angle. We have to prove that D2 equals to A. What I don't want any students to do is I don't want you to think that D2 equals to A because of exterior angle of the cyclic quad. No, that makes absolutely no sense. We don't even know if ABCD is a cyclic quad. That's what we're trying to prove. And so what you want to do is set a goal for yourself. You want to prove that A equals to D2. Now you can either do this by using a set of different principles and ideas, and that may lead to you receiving an answer of 80 degrees, for instance. Do the exact same thing, apply the exact same method to D2. You might use a different set of principles and ideas and concepts, which may lead to you getting an answer of 80 degrees for D2. And so since D2 equals to 80 degrees and since A equals to 80 degrees as well, they will equal to each other, which as a consequence will lead us to proving that ABCD is a cyclic quad. Why is that? Because A, which is the opposite interior angle, D2, which is the exterior angle, both have a value of 80 degrees. Or you could use the exact same method that I showed you previously, where you can prove that they all have an angle that they, both equal to. And by the way, the cyclic quad isn't obviously going to look like this in a diagram. They're never going to make it that easy and simple to identify. It may be a part of a larger, circle with different shapes and triangles. No. And so we could prove that A, for instance, equals to Z, do the exact same thing with D2, can prove that it equals to Z, and since they have an angle that they're both equal to, that means that A will equal to D2, which then confirms the fact that ABCD is indeed a cyclic quad. Now let's look at the last theorem. Opposite angles of a cyclic quad are equal to 180 degrees. Now, yet again, I do not want to see any students making the mistake of thinking, let me just label this, of thinking that A plus D equals to 180 degrees, therefore the cyclic quad. No, we don't know if A plus D is equal to 180 degrees because we don't even know if A, B, C, D is a cyclic quad. And so what you want to do is you want to use a different set of principles, theorems, and ideas. For instance, to calculate or to find that A equals to 100 degrees, do the exact same thing with D, different set of principles and ideas to prove that D is equal to 80 degrees. And now, if we add the value of C and D, we will get an answer of 180 degrees, which then proves that the opposite interior angles of a cyclic quad do amount to 180 degrees, or a supplementary, which then proves that ABCD is a cyclic quad. And so now let's track back. So we just want to backtrack and continue on and prove that DEFH is a cyclic quad. So which principle are we going to use? Are we going to use exterior angle of a cyclic quad, angles in the same segment, or opposite angles of a cyclic quad are supplementary? Now, to answer that question, we first have to highlight and identify the cyclic quad. We first have to identify DEFH. DE, this angle over here is H. DEFH. Okay, so this angle over here is F. Now, the very first thing that you have to do is you have to pay very close attention to the information that has provided that, all the annotations that has been made in the cyclic quad DHFE. Now, let's first start off with angles in the same segment. I like to start off. So now, actually, what you want to do is you first want to look for any numerical values. There aren't any numerical values that are part of the diagram. And so if you don't have any numerical values, I do suggest that you try start off with exterior angle of a cyclic quad. Now, the reason why I do suggest that you start off with exterior angle of a cyclic quad is because it is no coincidence that they've asked us to prove that D3 equals to the sum of, different set of angles. They're not just going to ask you to prove that statement, just to test your knowledge on a very juvenile level. No, 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 no. Now, they usually start off your question with a statement that you have to prove because that is very crucial to our it's very crucial to our progression. It's very crucial to us finding out what the different answers are following that question. Okay, so we have to use that to answer all the other different questions. And so we want to start off with D3 equals 2. So we prove that D3 equals to E1 plus H1. And so we want to write that down. Okay, so now what do we do? Well, we want to try and prove that D3 equals to the opposite interior angle of the cyclic of the shape that we're trying to prove is a cyclic quad. So we always want to write down a goal for ourselves before we continue. We want to prove that D3 equals to F1 plus F2. F1 plus F2 is the opposite interior angle. And so we just want to draw a goal for ourselves. What's our goal? We prove that D3 is F1 plus F2. What else do we do? If you want to prove that an angle is equal to the sum of a different set of angles, we always use columns, okay? Now, we just want to draw D3, F1, F2. Okay. Now, what we want to do is we want to list all the angles that D3 are equal to. We want to pay very close attention to the annotations. Now, remember, we already proved that D3 equals to H1 plus E1. So we want to include that into our column. H1 plus E1. Okay, let's do the exact same thing with F1. Let's pay very close attention to the color corresponding annotations. Let's look at F1. F1 is right over here. We've annotated it in orange. We've also annotated E1 in orange. So we know that E1 equals to F1 because of the tan chord theorem. So we're just going to write that down. What about F2? We've annotated F2 in green and we've annotated G2 in green. Okay, so we know that F2 equals to G2. What else does F2 equal to? We can see that we've annotated F2 in blue as well, and we've annotated E1 in blue as well. Why is that? Well, remember, they equal to each other because of the, oh wait, no, sorry, not, I mean H1, they all in the same color because they're actually all equal to each other because they have some, direct link, but we've annotated H1 as being equal to F2 because of the tan chord theorem. So we're just going to write down H1 right over here. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to identify an angle that occurs commonly among all three different angles. Okay, so which angle occurs the most often? Okay, there's a common occurrence in a certain, we have H1 plus E1. That's what D3 equals to. Now, F1 also equals to E1, which is pretty interesting because we've identified an angle that occurs, more than once. So we know that D3 and F1 have an angle that they share. They have an angle that they're both equal to. But now the only difference is that D3 doesn't directly equal to E1. D3 equals to the sum of a set of angles that includes E1. D3 equals to H1 plus E1. However, F1 equals to E1 in a direct manner. And so what do we do with this information? You just want to go back to this equation. So just refer back to this equation and we can change the E1 to F1. Now, you usually use this method when you are working with two angles in which one of the angles equals to the sum of two different angles and the other angle equals to just one angle, and that angle so happens to be a part of the equation. So in this case, D3, for instance, D3 equals to the sum of H1 and E1, and F1 equals to E1, and that E1 is a part of that equation. Oh, it's a part of that sum expression. And so we want to replace F1 with E1 because they're equal to each other. And so remember, we already drew like that equation right over here. So I'm going to replace E1 with F1. Now, let's focus on F2. F2 equals to G2. G2 is not a part of the equation. G2 is not a commonly occurring angle, so we're just going to ignore that. Let's pay attention to H1. H1 is a commonly occurring angle. H1 is a part of the sum expression of H1 plus E1. Just like I stated previously, the only difference is that D3 equals to the sum of H1 and E1. It does not directly equal to H1. But with F2, it directly equals to H1. And so you're going to use that exact same principle, that exact same idea, where you're just going to replace the H1 with F2 because they're both equal to each other. Okay, so we're going to replace H1 with F2. And what is it that we're left with? We're left with D3 equals to F2 plus F1. And now that we proved, we've actually succeeded in achieving our goal. That was our goal. Our goal was to prove that D3 equals to F1 plus F2, which as a consequence proves that DEFH is a cyclic quad. However, you need to structure your answer in a specific way so that you can achieve all marks, okay? So you first have to state that D3 equals to H1 plus E1 because of exterior angle of a triangle. Then you have to state the fact that H1 equals to F2 because of the tan chord theorem. And then you have to state the fact that E1 equals to F1 because of the tan chord theorem, and I've already explained this previously. And then you're going to use the column method. Do not, use the column method as a part of your, structural answer, so that the marker should not see that, or the marker will be very confused and dysregulated in his or hers, marking process. Okay, and so and then you're going to just substantiate your answer. You're going to validate the fact that DEFH is indeed a cyclic quad because of exterior angle equals to opposite interior angle. Now, I do not want to see anyone making the mistake of saying because of exterior exterior angle of a cyclic quad equals to. No. You're not going to use that, okay? Why is that? Well, because we're trying to prove that the shape is a cyclic quad. We've identified, in this case, D3 was the exterior angle. D3 and F1 plus F2 both had an angle that they were all equal to. And so that way we prove that the exterior angle, which is D3, equals to the opposite interior angle, which is F1 plus F2. And that's the statement you're going to use to validate your answer. Okay, everyone, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it was very helpful. Now, the only way you're going to improve in Euclidean geometry is if you repeat the question, if you cover it over and over again. You need to be consistent in practicing Euclidean geometry. You need to be consistent in the process of improving your Euclidean skills, okay? And if you're not going to improve. If you're writing your exam soon, binge watch the videos. If you'd like to receive the PDF version of the question, then consider leaving a comment, and or you could just send an email. And please, in the next video, we will be continuing on and finishing off with the next questions. But without further ado, I will see you in the next video.